Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to be focusing on Chapter 2, which is Foundations and Preparations. So, when we think about the client intake and the client initial interview, as well as therapy, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. Preparation and planning is going to be crucial to life in general, and the clinical interviewing in particular. As we talked about previously in Chapter 1, the clinical interview, that initial interview in which you meet someone, this is the face of you that you are putting forward. This is their first glimpse into what it is to work with you. If you are working in an environment that is not conducive to being warm and welcoming and friendly, if you're chaotic and disorganized with paperwork everywhere and crooked pictures on the walls, if you are not addressing the person by their name or preferred name, if they told you that ahead of time, this is something that can impact that clinical interview. That's why preparation and planning for the clinical interview is so important. In this chapter, it's going to help you to think about all the things you might not think about before you actually start meeting with clients. So, in Chapter 2, this is going to help you to be able to manage essential physical dimensions within the interview, apply practical approaches for dealing with ethical issues because they will come up, describe basic multicultural knowledge for working with several specific minority groups, and list methods and strategies for personal stress management and self-care. One of the things that I always tell my students, and it was taught to me by one of my former supervisors, is that you cannot pour from an empty cup. So if someone comes to you and says they're thirsty, if you give away all of your beverage, let's say water, then you're not going to be able to have any to hydrate yourself later. So dealing with stress and managing stress as well as engaging in self-care is going to be critical for you to be able to work with your clients. In addition, being able to manage stress and engage in self-care can also provide psychoeducation for your clients later on as you go through the therapy process to help them brainstorm ideas because you have learned by doing and are continuing to learn by doing. So let's first talk about the physical setting. When we think about the physical setting, this is going to include the things that you see on your screen: the room, seating arrangements, office clutter and decor, note-taking, video and audio recording. These are just some of the things that we need to think about when we think about the clinical interview and therapy in general. So let's first focus on the room. You want to make sure that when you are clinically interviewing someone, that you are keeping everything private. When someone comes to you to do an intake, to do an interview, to engage in therapy, they want to make sure that it is as confidential as possible. If you are sharing a space with multiple other people, if the door is wide open and people can go back and forth and possibly hear what it is that you are discussing or pop their head in, that's not keeping it private. You have a higher chance of the person not wanting to return to you or return to that space. They may not even go back to anyone in general, especially if this is their first time seeking out mental health services or therapy or counseling. They're not going to want to come back because their experience was negative. They can sense and feel that because it wasn't kept private, that their information is out there for anyone and everyone, and that's really scary for people. So making sure that wherever you are taking the clinical interview, make sure that it's private. Make sure that the door is closed if you feel comfortable, and also depending on the setting of your agency. Another thing you can do is manage or control the atmosphere. So that may mean things like taking into consideration lighting. If someone's coming to you and they are sensitive to light or sensitive to noises, then you can do a couple of things. You can make sure that you can, if you don't have a dimmer for your lights, that you shut off the main light and maybe have a smaller light near you and the client, so that way you have softer lighting that's available. If you are in a situation where there's a lot of noise outside, they do have noise cancellation machines that you can place outside the door that will emit white noise to help minimize all the chaos and all the traffic that's going on outside your door. You can also make sure that the decor in the space, including the colors of the walls and the things that you put up on the walls, are very warm, welcoming, inviting, maybe having positive affirmations such as believe in yourself, you can do this. If you work in a drug and alcohol setting, maybe having something that has the serenity prayer on it. But make sure that you can manage your atmosphere. If you have a lot of papers and a lot of clutter, make sure you can put them in a bin and hide the bin in a drawer, or that you can take those things and put them potentially in a closet to be pulled out later for you to reference. You also want to minimize interruptions. Interruptions include phone calls. If you have a landline or a cell phone, minimize people knocking on your door. How do you do this? You can first ask, if you have a landline, to have either the receptionist or secretary or administrative assistant make sure that they know what your schedule is. And during the time that you're meeting with clients, either have your calls go directly to a voicemail with hopefully not a machine. If there is a machine, you can ask them to handwrite any voice calls that you receive, or you can take that information and ask them to hold on to all of, take manual phone calls that may come to you and hand them to you in between sessions. As far as your cell phone, please make sure that you put it on silent. Vibrate can also distract from a session. So putting your cell phone on silent can help minimize the interruptions. You can also put a sign either on your door or your doorknob that states session in progress. That way people know that you're meeting with someone and they'll know not to come knock on your door. If there are people who are knocking on the walls or playing loud music, you can ask to ensure that during the time that you're meeting with clients, that people in the hallway can minimize this type of noise and reduce the decibels of their speakers. Never, ever, ever lock a door. You never want to do this. You also want to position yourself where you, in your seating, are closest to the door, or if your office has it, you are within a small arm's reach of any kind of panic button. Simply because if the session gets intense and the person that you are working with starts having a psychiatric emergency, you want to make sure that the door isn't locked. So if you use the panic button, that someone can come get you and bring you and your client to safety. Making sure that you are seated closest to the door ahead of your client can ensure a couple of things. One, again, if your client has some type of psychiatric emergency, that you are able to get yourself to a safe place, especially if the person that you're working with becomes physically violent and starts throwing things around your room or making remarks like they want to do things like kill you. You have an avenue to escape before your client gets to the door. Second, if there is an emergency such as a fire, you know the fire exits more than your client does. So being able to get to safety and guide your client to a safe space is going to be imperative, especially in situations like a fire where time is of the essence. Finally, when interruptions occur, try to manage it. You can either redirect the client back to the conversation that they were in the middle of, or you can say things like, I'm really sorry for some of that outside noise, but you were talking about this. That redirection is going to be extremely important. It lets the client know that you are paying attention and that you understand that sometimes interruptions will in fact take place. If someone knocks on your door, even if you have a sign up that says session in progress, you can let them know from the chair, session's in progress, please come back later. Or if it's something that continues to happen, you can step up, you can crack open the door, or you can scoot yourself outside the door and close the door behind you to let that person or people know that you're in the middle of session to please come back later. When you go back to the client, let them know, I apologize for this inconvenience. I took care of said interruption, but you were saying, and then redirect them back to that conversation. When you talk about seating arrangements, theoretical orientation is definitely going to influence this, simply because there is, as we've stated in class, that The rapport between the client and the therapist is definitely important. There are a number of studies that show that the direction in which the client and the therapist are sitting, the proximity to each other, and the minimalization of barriers like a desk in between them is actually more conducive to making sure that the session goes smoothly. It is suggested that a 90 to 100 degree angle is the most comfortable for most people that you'll see. So as you are arranging the seating in your space, make sure that the two of you have the ability to be 90 to 120 degrees between each other and at that angle so that you have the most view possible. And again, you also need to make sure that part of the seating arrangement is that you are closest to the door, not with your back to the door, but with the front of you to the door in a space that you can get to that door before any clients can. We should probably not insist on particular seating, but instead consider the client's individual needs and comforts. So that may mean that you set it up so that there are several seating options within the room. So you might have 3 or 4 seating arrangements that could happen that is available to you. And if you want to make sure that you have the closest avenue to the door, that maybe you place a clipboard with the potential to take notes in the seat that you want to sit in, which allows the client to then pick from 2 or 3 other seats that they feel comfortable seating in. It's really about their comfort, but you also want to make sure that you are being explicit and directive in the things that you are seeking. Let's talk for a second about office clutter and decor. In thinking about office clutter and decor, you want to manage your clutter. If the client walks in and sees your stuff thrown everywhere, paperwork all over your desk and not neat and organized, and seeing little trinkets all over the place, knickknacks everywhere, crooked pictures on the walls, nothing that really is warm and inviting or organized, they may start to think, did I make the right choice by going to see this person? There's a train of thought that says the way you feel on the inside is reflected on the outside in your space. So if a client walks in and sees stuff everywhere, they may think, oh, what is going on here? Does this person really have their stuff together? Does this person really have the ability to help me work through my stuff? Because maybe my space looks like this. So keeping things as organized as possible is going to be important. In doing this, you also want to consider letting your personality come out a little bit. There's nothing wrong with having things on the walls or pictures up. However, I'd also like to encourage that you don't put up too many personal items. If you want to put up your degree, that's one thing. But if you're going to put up your wedding photo for someone to see, that may then lead a whole string of conversation that takes away from the therapy session and directs that conversation towards you. What I've always encouraged people to do is to take their decor and make sure that it is very warm and inviting. You want to make sure that it is filled with positive affirmations and try to minimize your stuff like personal items and pictures as much as possible. You can have it in your office, but I've always encouraged people to maybe take those personal pictures and place them into a drawer or into a closet, wherever they can have a closed space that's just theirs. Put that stuff away while your clients are there. And then when your clients leave, you can pull it out and put it back onto your desk. Consider including some culturally sensitive objects in decor. If you are a big fan of folk art, if you are a fan of Dia de los Muertos, if you found a statue that was created showing or depicting a woman from an African tribe and it's something that speaks to you, definitely try to include those things. While it may not be everyone's cup of tea, it's stating that you are culturally diverse and you're culturally sensitive and that you have eclectic tastes, which are important when you're meeting with a variety of different people. Let's talk about note-taking. It's important to explain note-taking up front. If you're someone who enjoys taking notes during a session, or that's something that you need for you to help jog your memory about something that happened within the session, that is something I definitely would address with the clients up front, specifically during the initial client interview or during your second session. Just say something along the lines of, I'd just like to let you know that I'm listening during all of our sessions, and it's important for me to make sure that I am able to, that I'm able to advocate for you as best as possible and accurately remember things from our session. So I may take a couple of notes during the session if you're okay with that. If your client says no, then you can't take notes during session. If it's something that you don't need to do during the session, I would keep a notepad next to you, and as soon as your client leaves, give yourself about a 15-minute window between clients so that you can take down notes of things that happened during the session, looking at their tone, their affect. Was there anything special from the session that stuck out to you? What was the main topics of conversation? Were you able to talk about steps and goals? Did the client come in disheveled, more disheveled than usual? Those are important things that you would want to take notes on. If you don't manually like to take notes, you can also consider using technology like a digital recording device or an iPad that you can take notes on, either with a pen or typing. Just remember that those things can take away from the session. So you definitely want to make sure that you get that information from the client ahead of time, making sure that not only do they give verbal consent, but also written consent, especially if you're going to be doing audio or video recording. The agencies that you work for can have these things automatically drawn up, but in the event that they don't, you can also talk to your agency or the place that you're working and ask them, what is their policy on note-taking and audio or visual or video recording? Find out what their policies and procedures are. If they don't have one in place, talk to your supervisor about, what if I needed to take notes during session? What if I wanted to audio record the sessions? How can we go about creating something that would be respectful to the client, but also help me to be able to do my job zealously? And then find out what your agency wants to do about that. It's good to practice interviewing with and without taking notes to find out what is going to work best for you. And again, whenever you go into the field and you start doing your internship and practicum, especially in your upper level undergraduate course or your graduate level course, try taking notes before session or after session or during the session and see what works best for you. What is going to be the right thing for you? When you think about note-taking, please keep these things in mind. Don't let it interfere with the flow or the rapport within the session. If you have to tell your client, hey, can you hold on a second? Let me write this down. That's going to break the flow, and it's going to impact the rapport negatively that you've built with your client. Explain why you are taking notes. You don't need to go into full detail, but letting them know that you're doing it so that you can advocate for them, doing it so that you can ensure that you are remembering some of the most important things from the session, telling them that you are taking notes so that you can, help to connect this to their goals and objectives later. Those are some pretty valid reasons that you can provide your client to let them know that these are why you're taking the notes during session. If you say something like, oh, because I've been in an accident and I have head trauma, and this is the only way that I can remember, that might negatively impact the rapport, and then they might think there's something wrong with you and you're not able to do your job. If you are concerned about what you should or shouldn't say as far as why you're taking notes within session, definitely consult with your supervisor before the first session to talk to them about what you can do about that. You should never hide or cover your notes. When you're taking notes, it is important that you are transparent with your client. If your client asks to see your notes before you have put them in a formal sense, if you're in session, you should be able to show that to them unless your agency states otherwise. If you write something in there that maybe you wouldn't want someone else to see, then you probably shouldn't be writing it down. If you are writing your own personal notes about things that you need to do once you're done with your day, like going grocery shopping, and these are the items that you need to buy, you probably are doing it at the wrong time. And again, it can impact the flow and the rapport with your client. Never write anything you don't want to show your client. Very short, sweet, and true. Let clients read your notes if they request it. There are some clients who will request that information, and you should be able to show it to them. Touching upon video and audio recording, as I've said before, make sure that you get permission first. You want to make sure that it is verbal and that it is written, and know that it can be revoked at any time. When in doubt, definitely check with the agency or organization that you are doing your practicum or internship with to find out what their rules are around doing this. Many agencies will have paperwork already generated that they can provide to you, that you can provide to your client. You can then put that as part of their client file. Make sure that you keep it unobtrusive. You don't want to hide anything from your clients, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to zealously advocate for them. Double check your setup and watch out for Murphy's Law. Oh my goodness, this is such an important thing to consider. When you think of Murphy's Law, in short, if you think that something could go wrong, it probably would go wrong. So if you are solely relying on video or audio recording for yourself, just note that there are things that can happen. You may forget to press play. You may not have the sound all the way up. So there's visual, but no audio. Or it's just blank white noise all throughout. So when it comes to setting up and getting ready to record a session, if your client consents to it, make sure that you test your recording devices beforehand to ensure that everything is on, is properly working, is properly recording, and that the sound is at a level that you can hear. Let's go on to professional and ethical issues. Some of the things that we're going to be covering, at least in this section, is self-presentation as well as social behavior, time, informed consent. My goodness, informed consent is huge. Confidentiality, documentation, and stress management. When it comes to self-presentation, as specific to grooming and attire, dress in a way that can take advantage of first impressions. Typically, most agencies want you to dress at least business casual, and they frown upon things like jeans, ripped shorts, short dresses, and clothing that can reveal a lot of skin, not only in the arms, but also the chest, the midsection, and the legs. Talking about cleavage and crotches and other professional dress issues, please make sure that you are fully covered. If you have to question whether or not this is appropriate to wear to work, err on the side of caution and don't wear it. Pick something else. If you are a feminine individual and you decide that you want to wear a dress to work and you're not sure if it's showing too much cleavage or could ride up and show something like a crotch or near that area or an upper thigh, go get a tank top or something to cover your chest under your dress and wear something like leggings. That way you are preventing any oopsies from happening. It's also important to monitor your social behavior, not only in person, but also online. Oh my goodness, these are huge. When you're thinking about monitoring your social behavior, if you are, for example, doing some type of counseling of a Christian nature, let's say, if you end up going to a sex club and a client sees you entering into a sex club, that might be something that is a little concerning to your client. So if you are someone who is, again, doing Christian counseling and your client may see you entering or exiting a provocative sex club, you've maybe made a comment in session about how dirty those places are, that's definitely going to impact in a very negative way your rapport between yourself as the therapist and the client. Know, as we had talked about in chapter 1, know that there is a thing that is called a dual relationship with your clients. And those are things that do need to be addressed. Telling your client, I may see you in public places. Let's talk about how you want me to address you, or if you want me to address you at all, what it is that you want to do as far as, if you don't want me to address you, I'll go in an opposite direction, or I won't make eye contact. If you do want me to address you, what name should I address you as? Do you want to disclose that, I'm your therapist? If not, it's okay to say that I am, let's come up with a term, an acquaintance, an associate, however you two want to term it. The other thing we need to think about with social behavior is making sure that things that you choose to engage in outside of the session are not going to be things that could potentially influence your session. For example, if you are a therapist and you go to a peaceful march, know that your clients may see you. And depending on what you are marching for, that could impact the rapport. I'm not telling you to never do anything again, but I'm telling you that what you do outside of the office, if it is seen by a client or even a potential client or a former client, it is something that can impact you socially. The other thing we need to talk about is social media. Please make sure that if you have a social media page, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever the case may be, Pinterest, please make sure that you set your pages to private, not public. And I'll tell you why. Your clients will try to find you. They may try to friend you on Facebook. They may try to look at your pictures, look at your posts, get to know you better, and potentially in ways that you don't feel comfortable. So err on the side of caution and make sure that as you are going forward with your career, that your social media pages are kept private. The other thing to think about is that, again, those dual relationships may exist. So you may be friends of a friend of a client. So they may still be able to see, even if you marked your stuff private, they still may be able to see some of your social media pages. As we just talked about, where you don't want to write anything that you wouldn't want to show your client, also remember that what you post on social media, if it's something that you wouldn't want your job or your agency or organization to see, or even your clients to see, then you may not want to post it on social media. Err on the side of caution with that. There have been situations that I've seen where people have vented on social media about a client that they had. That client saw that information, and even though there wasn't any identifying information, that client knew that this person who was venting was referencing them. And they reported it to the state, and the person who made that post got into a lot of trouble. I don't want to see that happen to you. So remember, what you do outside of your session, whether in person or online, can impact your rapport with your organization and agency and your clients. So always err on the side of caution and try to be as private as possible. Is it okay to touch clients? That's a really great question. First, you want to check with your organization or agency to see what their rule is on this. Second, you have to also be cognizant of your own personal comfort. Really, your personal comfort comes first, but it's also, what does the agency say or the organization that you're working for? If you're a hugger and your agency says, nope, we don't do that, then you might need to navigate and fist pump your clients or high five your clients or shake your clients' hands. I always err on the side of caution with my own clients, and I encourage you to do the same. I tend to ask my clients, are you comfortable with a handshake? They may not be comfortable with a handshake. They may say, no, I'm not comfortable with it. So then you don't want to put them in a position of discomfort. Always gain consent from your clients before doing anything. Asking them, let's proceed forward. What are your thoughts on that? Or, hey, are you ready to, now that we've gotten this little bit of information out of the way, let's move to this next section. Are you okay with that? Always make sure that you get consent for everything you do with your clients, but specifically around touching. It can be misconstrued as sexual harassment if you go to hug a client and they're not comfortable or ready for it. It can also, depending on who your client is, it can send a very negative message to them. For example, if you are working with people in recovery from sex love issues, or who is a recovering sexual addict, hugging them is actually detrimental to their treatment. If you're dealing with someone who is autistic and you don't know that they're autistic and they're sensitive to tactile stimulation, that can cause a breakdown. So you always want to ask your clients, hey, when I greet you or when we end session, are you comfortable with, what are you comfortable with? A high five, a fist bump, a handshake? What works best for you, if anything at all? You always want to give them the option of saying, no, I really don't need anything. I'm not ready for it. I don't want to do it. If your client seems unsure in their answer, always say, it's okay for us to just be able to end session and give each other a wave if that's more comfortable for you. When presenting your credentials, always be honest and straightforward. If you don't feel comfortable putting your degrees on a wall, that's okay. But always make sure that you tell your clients who you are, where you've gotten your education from, and how long you've been practicing. For example, hi, my name is Victoria Panna. I graduated with a clinical mental health counseling degree from Villanova University. I graduated in 2011. I have been practicing since February of 2010. I started doing my internship, or my practicum, and then my internship. I have been licensed in, this state since this year, and this state since this year, and this state since this year. If you are a licensed associate or licensed professional in the state of New Jersey, you need to make sure that your credentials are visible for your clients to see. If it is not visible for your clients to see, if they were to ask you, you need to make sure that you have your credentialing available easily. Let's talk about time. Be clear about time boundaries. If you have 45 minutes to work with your client, it's okay to say at the beginning of the session, hey, so glad that you're here today, Jim Bob. Just to let you know, we have 45 minutes together. I'll let you know when we have about 5 minutes left. You want to make sure that you start the session on time. So if your session starts at 12 noon and it goes until 12:45, make sure that you are ready to go and bring Jim Bob in your session by 12 o'clock. Make sure you end on time too. If your session ends at 12:45, again, you can let Jim Bob know that he has 5 minutes left at 12:40. And then you want to make sure that you start wrapping things up at least 3 minutes before the session and end the session promptly at 12:45. That's when you'll be escorting Jim Bob out the door. Something to think about is that if your client comes late, if you have another client lined up after him, you need to be respectful of their time too. So if your session was supposed to start at 12 and Jim Bob doesn't show up until 12:05, let him know, hey, Jim Bob, we normally have a 45-minute session. However, because you were late and I have someone coming after you, today it's going to be a 40-minute session. Make sure that you bill accordingly. When you think about time and culture, you have to be open to understanding other cultural perspectives. There are some people who believe, based on their culture, that being on time is late. There are some people who believe that being on time is early. There are some people who are going to be consistently late, and some people who might be annoyed that they got there early and you didn't see them early. You need to be open to understanding other cultural perspectives. If that type of tension starts to arise, it's okay to have that conversation with your client. This should also be something, when you talk about time, it's something that should be addressed during the clinical intake. Each session is approximately 45 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever your agency says, that each session is approximately, is 60 minutes. So it's important that you get here a few minutes early so that we can start our session on time and end our session on time. There's nothing wrong with saying that. When we think about confidentiality, make sure that you know the limits of confidentiality. Know and be able to accurately recite them. When it comes to confidentiality, you also want to make sure that you introduce it up front. I always let them know at the beginning of our time together, so during the clinical intake. And I also let them know about I will review it in the first couple of sessions as well. So, what is confidentiality? The way that I have shared it is that I tell my clients, whatever happens in this room stays in this room unless you disclose intend to harm yourself, someone else, or property, or if you disclose elder abuse, which is 65 years of age and over, or child abuse, 12 years of age and younger, or under 13. It's important to be clear and to review your professional standards, not only based on your agency, but based on your state's licensing organization, as well as the professional organization in which you are connected to, the American Psychological Association, the National Association of Social Workers, or the American Counseling Association. When you think about consultation, it is central to all ethical decision-making models. So don't ever make a decision on ethical dilemmas in isolation. If you are questioning something or concerned about something, it is okay to talk to your supervisor. I definitely recommend it. Before making any kind of decisions, always run it through your supervisor first. It's okay to say to the client, hey, I'm not really sure about this, but I can talk to my supervisor and get back to you at our next session. And then talk to your supervisor, and it might be something that your supervisor has to talk to your client about. Or they'll tell you, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do it. So always make sure that anything that could pose an ethical dilemma, that it is addressed with your supervisor. Consultation provides intellectual stimulation, which helps to enhance your practice by reaching out to a couple of people about a case or talking with your supervisor or other therapists that are part of your organization that can help you to become a better therapist and counselor. Now let's talk about informed consent. Informed consent is an ethical and legal mandate. It is something that needs to be reviewed both written and verbally. You should have a comprehensive informed consent document written in plain language, typically, at least from a research perspective, at or around an 8th grade level. It needs to include information on confidentiality, diagnosis, family participation, supervision, etc. You need to be open and honest with your client. Not only do you review this with them in person and verbally talk about it, but then you provide it to them in writing. You may need to revisit informed consent as concerns or issues arise. If your agency makes a change to informed consent, if the APA, ACA, or NASW makes a change, if your state makes a change, these are things that may need to be reviewed with your client later. Let's talk about documentation. Attorneys aren't fans of oral history because if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. There are so many benefits to taking good notes, but there's also a limit to the notes. So, one of the most popular notes that are provided are called SOAP notes: subjective description, objective observation, assessment, and the plan. I will be providing you at our next class with a copy of SOAP notes so that you get to see what this actually looks like. Something to think about when it comes to note-taking is that you need to follow the APA guidelines. Well done clinical records will document that planning has taken place with you and the client, that you've adhered to the treatment guidelines that you have set forth. It allows different providers to review your work. It enhances continuity when there are treatment breaks or referrals to other providers. They can see what it is that you've set forth, what it is that you have been working on, what the client has achieved, and what are some steps that they're working on in order to achieve their outlined goals. It protects you and your clients during any legal or ethical proceedings. It also helps to fulfill insurance or third-party requirements. Something to keep in mind, though, something to keep in mind is that you want to be detailed in your SOAP notes, as we see here, but because, as you see on the second to bottom bullet point, that it protects clients and providers during legal or ethical proceedings, you want to make sure that you provide enough information, but not too much information. What do I mean by that? You want to make sure that you are taking proper notes and that you are providing all documentation that is accurate and reliable in the best interest of your client. Making sure that everything you do is objective and not subjective is going to be key, especially if there is an ethical or legal proceeding that takes place. You want to make sure that the notes that you're taking using the SIP model doesn't put in negative information about your client that could actually cause harm to them. When it comes to note taking, that's going to take time and practice, and you want to make sure that you put things in. If you are too detailed with your notes, you are opening yourself up for an ethical or legal dilemma that could in fact take place. And if the way that you have worded things is not objective but very subjective, and you don't go back and talk to your client about said concern in one of your notes, and then something happens, you could be held liable, or your agency could be held liable for failure to adhere to what is, your standards and what the standards of the agency are set forth under the state guidelines. And if they harm someone else or themselves and you put that in and it wasn't disclosed to your supervisor, then you can get in a lot of trouble for that. So when it comes to record keeping, you want to put in enough information that you are able to advocate for your client, but not put too much detailed information in where you may open yourself up for an ethical issue. Now let's talk about multicultural preparation. The cross-disciplinary mantra for multicultural preparation is known as awareness, knowledge, skill, advocacy. AXCA is going to be super important because there are many different minority groups and a plethora of diversity that takes place today. So it's super important for you as a counselor in training that you are aware of different cultures, that you're knowledgeable, even basically knowledgeable of different cultures, that you have the skill to work with different cultures or know when it's okay to make a referral to someone else, and that you advocate for all of your clients regardless of their cultural background. So as we go through this, we're going to look at 4 large worldviews. We're going to look at First Nation individuals, African American culture, Hispanic, Latino American culture, and Asian American culture. When looking at First Nation people or individuals, there is actually a debate over the best words for naming this group. The main rule is be respectful. Did you know that there are over 500 separate tribal groups in the United States? I didn't initially. How many local tribes can you identify? How many do you actually know something about? Most people don't. If you don't know about a local tribe, or if you can't identify a local tribe, it's okay to say to your client, I don't really know very much about this. Can you tell me more about it? That might be a huge aspect of that culture, maybe a huge aspect of their lives. And even though you may not know about it, A, make sure that you do your research before going into session. And B, it's okay to ask your client to educate you based on their knowledge and their lived experiences of said culture. It helps to actually build rapport and helps you become a more culturally diverse counselor. Some things to think about is that when you talk about First Nation individuals, their tribal identity is often going to be a major focus of their lives, because that will also help with understanding about family roles, because they may have a specific family role that ties into their tribal identity. Also, when it comes to their tribal role or their identity, that may impact humor. You may accidentally say something thinking that you're being funny, but actually it's very offensive. Spirituality may also be tied directly or indirectly to their tribal identity. So understanding that this tribe looks at spiritual or religiosity in this way is going to be extremely important, because you don't want to do or say something that may offend them, even if it's by accident. Also, depending on their tribal identity, they may want to share information, but they also may want to share material goods. They may not want to share information. They may be very closed off to it. So that would give you an understanding of the connection to their tribal identity, whether they share or don't share information, the manner in which they share or don't share information, or the specific information, as well as material goods. As a rule of thumb, we typically don't accept material goods from our clients. There are some organizations that say, oh, if it's under a certain dollar value, err on the side of caution and let them know that you can't accept that, but that you encourage them to donate it or to keep it for themselves and tie it back to a goal that they have within their treatment plan. Also, for some people, their tribal identity influences how they view time. For some people, depending on their tribal identity, time may not be that big of a deal. For others, time may be a huge deal. So understanding not only your client's specific tribe, but other tribes in general can help you to understand how they may view time. If they view time as lackadaisical, it may be important to help them to understand that time is important for you, so that you can work together. So maybe the time that you schedule their appointment doesn't work. Is there a different time that works? Or making sure that they know, hey, we have 45 minutes together and that time goes by really, really fast. So let's work on finding ways that we can optimize our time. Now let's look at the African American culture. Between 1518 and 1870, there were about 15 million Africans who were captured to serve as slaves in the New World. If you're African American, what do you know about your culture? If you're not, what do you know about your African American friends and colleagues and their culture? Understand that depending on how they identify as being African American or Black, where they come from, and how they tie themselves to their culture are all going to be super important. Within the African American and Black communities, family roles are huge. In many Black and African American communities, they view family as not just the immediate family, but also the extended family. And that friends of the family are referenced as family members. They're not just friends. So it's super important to note that when they talk about their auntie or their uncle, it may be biological, but it may be friends of their parents. Super important to make sure that if you question, is it biological or not, that you just ask those questions, because there may be a lot of family members that are referenced. Religion and spirituality are going to be super important for a lot of people of the Black and African American communities. So it's important to ask them. You can ask it in your intake paperwork, but you may also have to have an explicit conversation about it. So, tell me about your religious or spiritual beliefs, and then find out from there. If it's something that you are not familiar with or comfortable with, have a conversation with your supervisor about how you can better educate yourself on this, and if making a referral to someone else is going to be in your client's best interest as well as yours. When they look at couple and gender roles, it's going to be different than other cultures. For a large number of people in the Black and African American communities, they don't view marriage the same way that other cultures do. They don't look at cohabitation the same way that other cultures do. They don't look at children the same way as other cultures do. So it's super important, depending on your client, that you have a basic information about how the African American or Black community looks at couples and gender roles and scripting, as well as what are their specific beliefs? What do they believe in when it comes to gender scripting, gender roles, and the impact of coupling, marriage, cohabitation, divorce, children before marriage, children after marriage, etc. Also, don't ever make assumptions. Assumptions are often wrong. When in doubt, ask explicit questions. It's okay to say, I don't really know a lot about this. Can you tell me more about it? Tell me about your experience. Now let's look at Hispanic and Latino cultures. Do you use Hispanic or Latino, Latina, Latinx, which is gender neutral, and why? How many Latino or Hispanic countries can you name? On a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you know about Latino culture? Is it mostly positive, neutral, negative, or a mix? Well, again, like with in the last two cultures that we've talked about, Religion and belief systems are going to be different than other cultures. Many people who are part of the Hispanic or Latinx communities will put a heavy emphasis on religious beliefs. In a lot of African American and Black communities, they're going to encourage you, or they're going to encourage people within their community to talk to their family about issues and concerns. A large number of people in Hispanic and Latinx cultures encourage people to talk to the priest about or someone of a higher status in their religious or spiritual beliefs. So religion and their belief system around religiosity and spirituality are going to be huge to understand. There's also going to be this notion of personalismo, machismo, respeto, and charlar. So when we think about personalismo, this is emphasizing human persons. When we are talking about machismo, we are thinking about a very strong masculine pride. When we're thinking about respeto, we are thinking about respect. When you're thinking about charlar, this is conversation. So the human person, a strong presence of a male, respect and conversation are going to be so important within the Hispanic and Latinx culture, depending on what culture you're in. It also is going to determine what is more appropriate for people to have these and engage in these conversations. Is the matriarch or the patriarch the person that should be having these conversations? You know, if someone is hesitant to talk about something, it could be because they were brought up that the respeto is to talk to the head priest in their church and not a therapist. We need to make sure that we understand these things in order to zealously advocate for our clients. We also need to talk about family roles. In Hispanic culture or Latinx culture, it's important to note that family roles are going to be different than potentially other roles. For many Hispanic and Latinx cultures, they're all about traditional scripting, husband and wife and children. They're going to be mothers in certain Hispanic and Latinx culture are seen as the caregivers, whereas the father is typically the head of the household. Motherhood is highly valued in certain Hispanic and Latinx cultures. They put the role of parenthood over the role of husband and wife or partners. So we need to make sure that we understand these things. Also, when it comes to gender roles, they are often going to look at traditional gender scripting in a lot of Hispanic and Latinx cultures. They have their own distinct understanding of what it means to be masculine or feminine. The identity, again, of machismo is going to be a huge thing because for many Hispanic and Latinx cultures, it is about patriarchy and it is about the male head of the household. Madamismo, this is a newer term for the female version of machismo, is connected to religious images of the Virgin Mary and tends to stress obedience to males and moral purity and motherhood, denying oneself for your children, your family, and your husband. So we need to make sure that we understand these things because those might be directly connected to why someone comes to see you and why they seek your support. So let's talk about Asian American cultures. How big is Asia? And who gets counted as being Asian? What facts and what stereotypes do you know about Asian people? How do you know the differences between the facts and the stereotypes? It's all going to be dependent on the Asian American culture. So when we think about the Asian American culture, understand that it is larger than you probably even know. When we think about Asia, Asia is going to be huge. It is a diverse and growing population within the United States, and a lot of Asian Americans can trace their roots to more than 20 countries in East and Southeast Asia, as well as the Indian subcontinent. They all have their own unique histories, cultures, languages, and other attributes. For example, it could be Chinese, Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, Pakistani, Cambodian, Thai, Bangladeshi, Burmese, Nepalese, Indonesian, Sri Lankan, Malaysian, Mongolian. These all are distinct and they are all different. So it's super important to make sure that you gather this information about your client's cultural background so that you can advocate for them and understand how these can tie to their concerns. When we think about Asian American cultures and family, you're going to find that for a lot of Asian American families, many of them are going to assimilate in many aspects before acculturation, or it takes them a longer time to acculturate, especially if they are not born in the United States. If they are born in the United States, those children, as they get older, will acculturate to the United States dominant culture. But if they are immigrants, if they are not full citizens yet, if they are first generation, second generation, they will most likely assimilate more than they will acculturate. Family roles tend to be traditional. So you have traditional husband, wife, providers. There's a huge emphasis, like the Hispanic or Latinx culture, on family, but there's even more of a focus on bringing large families together, and not just immediate families, but multi-generational families. Also take into consideration that many people who are here in the United States, if they have immigrated or are first generation, second generation, or even third generation, their great-great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, or even their great-grandparents, or maybe even their grandparents, they may have come here as war brides, specifically from World War II. So they may have a very different understanding of what it means to be whatever Asian culture they are identifying with. There's also an orientation towards authority, specifically depending on where they are coming from in Asia, either the matriarch or the patriarch or the family. Typically, you don't make any decisions without talking to the matriarch or the patriarch or the family. If you are working with someone who is Asian American and holds this part of their culture and traditional value near to them, in order to make changes, they may have to get the authority of the matriarch or patriarch. A lot of Asian Americans are also very spiritual or religious, and they come from different backgrounds: Buddhism, some are Islamic, some are Christian, Catholic. So it's important that you don't just make an assumption of what they are based on where they're from or where their family origin is from. It's okay to explicitly ask them, and ask them to what degree do they hold that spiritual or religious belief to their life. How does this impact what they do daily, what they do on holidays? You're also going to find that you're going to have clients from other minority groups. They can be GLBT+, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. We're going to talk about that in the next page. They also may be persons with disabilities. They may be someone who has a different ability. It could be cognitive or learning, physical. It could be a combination of those things, intellectual. With these things in mind, depending on who you work with, their different ability may impact their life. They may not see it as an impact in their life, but it's okay to ask, so having this different ability, when did it happen, and how did you cope with that? For some people, they may be like, well, I coped just fine, and others may struggle with it. If they have an intellectual ability, remember, you can only see someone who is mild or moderate. If they're severe or profound, you will not get reimbursed from your insurance company. But someone who is mild or moderate, they have the physical and sexual attributes of an adult, but the intellectual capabilities of someone who is younger. And their strengths and their barriers are all going to be different. It's going to be person specific. So take these things in mind as you're coming up with goals and plans and steps towards goals. Some may also be very religiously committed. They may be someone who is interested in working with someone who is a Christian counselor, a Jewish counselor, an Islamic counselor. They may want someone who has the same values and morals and beliefs that they do. If there is someone in your agency that can see them, then talk to your supervisor about making that recommendation that they work together. If there is no one available and you are working with them, it's okay to say, I might not fully understand, but I would love for you to tell me, how does this impact your life? It's a way for you to expand your repertoire and to learn more about them. If you have extreme discomfort, then I certainly encourage you to talk to your supervisor about the discomfort in working with them and how it may impact you and your client, to see if there's someone else that they can be transferred to. Here we have the genderbread person. The genderbread person is essentially a way for you to be able to understand people who may be gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans identified. Essentially, your identity, or what is between your ears, is going to be different than your biological sex or what is between your legs. That can be different than how you express yourself, say by your mannerisms and how you dress. That's different to who you are sexually and or romantically and or emotionally attracted to. Understanding that things are done on a continuum. It's not black and white, all or nothing. It's very much a lot of gray, and it falls on these continuums. But being able, for example, in looking at someone's identity, how much of their womanness or maleness do they encompass? When it comes to their gender expression, are they more feminine or masculine? When it comes to their attraction, are they attracted to women or feminine people, or more men or masculine people, or somewhere in between? It's okay to ask this information to clarify, but it's important to educate yourself, because if they say that, if they say their femaleness, well, are they talking about their biological or anatomical sex, or their gender identity? It's okay to ask those clarifying, questions. When you talk about considerations for minority groups, it's important to understand that minority group professionals are highly valued. There are often going to be people who underutilize services like therapy. There may be an extensive pressure to perform and be all-knowing, but guess what? That can actually impact your ability to build a rapport with your client. It's okay to say, I don't really understand. Can you teach me? Help me understand, so that we can come up with this goal together, or that we can, so that I can best support you. Also, you need to watch out for instant countertransference. Well, what is that? There's a difference between transference and countertransference. So when you are talking about countertransference, this is a redirection of the therapist's feelings towards a client, and you then can build an emotional entanglement with a client. They might remind you of your favorite person. They may remind you of someone that you have loved and lost. If you find that you are putting forth a little more information and time and building around some client more than others, there could be the potential for countertransference to be there. Transference is where your client will redirect or project their feelings about their parent, their sibling, their partner onto you, and expect that you will react the same way. You need to watch out for these things. If you are projecting yourself onto the client, or the client's projecting onto you, those are conversations that you need to first have with your supervisor, and then decide how you will address it with the client. Let's talk about stress management and self-care. Working in mental health is extremely high stress. Understand that it is more high stress because you are essentially holding space for a number of clients each day, each week, each month, each year. A lot of different personalities, a lot of different issues and concerns, a lot of different highs, a lot of different lows. There's a lot on your plate. Not only do you have that time with your clients, but then you have paperwork you have to complete for billing and paperwork that you have to complete for notes for every client, and making sure that things are ready to be submitted on a timely manner to insurance companies so that your client can get reimbursement or can continue to come see you. There's intake paperwork and discharge paperwork and referrals that are being made, connecting to places within the community to broaden your referral base and support for your client. There's a lot of stuff that happens. So yes, it's definitely going to be high stress. Also understand that we are all human. We all make mistakes, except that you are not perfect, except that you will make a mistake. That is how you will learn. It may cause tension with the client. It may cause the rapport to be damaged. As long as you are not doing it intentionally, then understand that mistakes happen. That's why they make racers on the backs or tops of pencils. How you approach stress management and self-care is going to be vital to how you are going to be able to continue working with clients. There's physical, psychological, social, cultural, emotional, and spiritual or nature-made self-care tips and stress management tips that can be super helpful for you. When you think about self-care, it's important for you to look at all of these areas to see where can you manage your stress best and what self-care techniques can you employ to each one of these areas in a variety of ways to help you to work through things. So as we go through this class, we will actually work on additional self-care techniques. But think about things now. If you had to stimulate all or most of your senses, what would you do physically to help stimulate your sense so that you can engage in self-care? What is a food that can bring you comfort that potentially is healthy for you? What smell helps to bring you comfort? Do you like to work out? Does working out help to release endorphins to help you to physically feel better? Is there a song or a sound that helps to bring you back into the present space and even calm down? Is there a color or a scene like a mountain or an ocean that helps to bring you physical peace? So when you think about ways to manage stress and self-care, whatever works best for you, start coming up with a list of things that you can use in the moment to help you to work through your physical self-care, your psychological self-care, your social, your cultural, your emotional, your spiritual, your nature-based self-care. And in this class, we will explore these things together because not only will they help you, but they will also help your clients. As part of our discussion in closing this chapter, what felt most important to you from this chapter? What do you want to remember? How can you apply some of the ideas from this chapter into your clinical work? As we go through this class and as we go through this semester, we're going to be addressing these things and coming back to this to ensure that you consistently are being as ethical as possible, that you're setting up yourself to work best with your clients, and that you are as culturally competent as possible. I hope today was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, I look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.